Yes, I think it's quite possible. The Iranians are preparing themselves. The Israeli regime is, and the West is preparing the Israeli regime. So they are working together. Iran is basically on its own, but it is preparing itself. Iran has an advantage in that last time around, the Israeli regime gave it everything it had. It was a sort of, as they like to call it, regime change operation that was supported by the collective West, the United States in particular. So they use all of their capabilities. Iran, on the other hand, it was a on the first day, it was caught off guard. It knew that an attack was coming, but the scope of the attack, I think, they miscalculated. So it was an intelligence failure without a doubt. But the military victory of Iran over the Israelis, despite the intelligence failure, I think shows that Iran, under difficult circumstances, when it was, basically it confronted a blitzkrieg attack that killed so many of its senior commanders and destroyed installations on day one. Despite all that, the fact that it was able to regroup and force the Israelis to seek a ceasefire shows that Iran has an advantage now because while the Israelis used everything that they had at their disposal, the Iranians didn't do that. Some of the newer missiles uh, were the newer models, they were left untouched. And we have an even newer model now, a newer missile that has been added to Iran's missile defense force or missile offense force. We all know that none of the underground missile bases were even used during the first war. And Iran right now is busy trying to deal with the mistakes that it made, the shortcomings that it had, both intelligence and military. So I think Iran definitely has a much greater advantage as time progresses than the Israelis. Sometimes people say, then why does the Israeli regime want to launch another attack? And I think it really is more about Netanyahu and his coalition and their own selfish interests that are more important than the interests of the regime for them. So Netanyahu and his coalition, the war that they launched on Lebanon, the continued genocide in Gaza, the attacks on Yemen, and the war against Iran, all of these are about Netanyahu and the coalition rather than the interests of the Israeli regime itself. So another war against Iran, I think, would be uh, a failure for the regime. It would probably be a bigger failure for the regime than the first war. But he's not looking out for the interests of Zionism. He's looking out for the interests of Netanyahu. I don't know much about the details. I know that it has a very heavy payload. What we saw during the 12-day war was that progressively, the percentage of Iranian missiles that were downed by the regime and the Americans and the Europeans and this coalition of countries, which includes regional countries, radar installations from Turkey to installations across the Persian Gulf were used. The airspace of Jordan was used. The airspace of Iraq was used, even though Iraq was opposed to it, but they couldn't do anything about it. So this huge coalition, they were working to block Iran's missile attacks. But during the last few days, 90% of Iranian missiles got through. And I think that shows that the more advanced Iranian missiles are better equipped to pass through the multi-layered defenses that these countries collaborated to put together. And as I said, some of Iran's missiles have never been used. Now, some of these missiles, I think they have different missiles, both to make it more difficult for the enemy to down them, but also they serve different purposes. Some of them have warheads that break up into smaller warheads. Some of them have a bigger payload. Some of them are very precision. They strike the target precisely. Some are not as precise, especially the older missiles, but they can be used for big targets that don't need where you don't need great precision. There are lots of calculations which I obviously don't understand because I'm not an expert on these things and I'm not privy to the information anyway. But the point is that the, the Israeli regime was running out of, and the Americans, they were running out of missile defense systems. And the Iranians have a lot more missiles that they haven't used. The overwhelming bulk of Iran's missiles that have been prepared for the Israeli regime in particular, they're still in place and they're building more of them. The missiles that Iran and the other underground bases that Iran has developed to the Persian Gulf have not been touched. Even when the Iranians fired 12 missiles at Qatar, at the American base, where 6 struck their targets, especially destroying a key radar installation there, those 12 missiles were not the medium and short range missiles that are prepared for the Persian Gulf and the uh, the the Indian Ocean and the Sea of Oman. Uh, those those are prepared. Those are also being upgraded as we speak in case the Americans seek to get involved. And as I've discussed earlier, if the Americans get involved, the Iranians have the capability to destroy everything in the Persian Gulf, all oil and gas assets and ships and tankers, as well as installations that take oil to the Red Sea or to alternative ports for exports. So the Iranians are preparing both for the Israeli regime and for the Americans. They're upgrading their systems, even though the systems that they have, as we saw, were quite effective against the Israelis. In round 2, Iran will obviously be in a much stronger position because the Israeli regime used everything at its disposal. All of its assets inside Iran were used, and most of them have been arrested. Um, their capability, their Iranian weaknesses are being studied. So Iran is going to be more careful about protecting its officials, more careful about protecting its anti-aircraft and anti-drone systems. We have to keep in mind, by the way, that no Israeli aircraft entered Iranian airspace during the 12 days. They launched their missiles from Iraq, and they flew over Syria and Jordan, and in Iraq they fired their missiles. Though the drones that they launched came to Iran, so it was missiles and drones that were hitting targets in Iran, and many of those drones came from neighboring countries. Some all the way from Syria, some from northern Iraq, and there are strong accusations made that many also came from the Republic of Azerbaijan. But also when it comes to northern Iraq and the Republic of Azerbaijan, I think it's going to be more difficult for the Israeli regime next time round. As you know, Aliyev in Baku is he has also antagonized Russia, and Russia has bombed his assets in Ukraine and arrested many people in Russia who are somehow more or less affiliated to Aliyev. But in Iraqi Kurdistan also, the Iranians and their allies have discovered many of those places and people who are involved in firing drones. So it's going to be a lot more difficult for the Israeli regime next time around. The Iranians, of course, they will they have a long way to go to be fully prepared. They're going to make some short-term adjustments, medium-term adjustments, and long-term adjustments. And right now, I think those short-term adjustments and changes are the focus for the weeks or months ahead. I think that Iran's defenses will be better. because Iran is looking at all its shortcomings and what sort of offensive capabilities the Israeli regime has and how it was used, and how, therefore, to adjust to be able to better protect itself against these capabilities. But on the other hand, I think the Iranians are going to hit much harder, and they're going to be very swift. It's going to be very bad for the Israeli regime. And as I said, Iran is also preparing itself in the Persian Gulf region as well. Um, Iran's assets across the Persian Gulf have been increased, and Iran's capabilities to defend itself against drones and aircrafts are also increasing too.